Okay, so thanks for being here. It's nice to be sharing this work with you that's been ongoing. One paper has come out of it, but it's still a work in progress very much. I'm going to be talking about drinking water and a non-government organisation in Cambodia called Teuk Saat 1001 Fountains. I will illustrate various points about concerns with the water commons, in particular, how that intersects with the human right to water and what the tension is between the two, given that the human right to water is part of development discourse nowadays. The human right to water was ratified by United Nations members in 2010, but ever since then there's been a lot of consternation about it. Really, it doesn't change the way water is governed, or doesn't in principle have anything to say about the means by which water is to be delivered. So it's been critiqued as an empty signifier by Swyngedouw, Sultana and Loftus. And for example, big businesses would be just as supportive of the human right to water as water activists would if the human right to water was to open markets for them. So a counter narrative really comes from the public goods activists' perspective, which is holding on to the commons in quite a traditional sense, saying that government should be protecting the water commons and making investments in the water commons to guarantee inalienable access rights and the rights of citizens to participate in decisions. Bottled water has become a big part of international development, largely because of the provocation perhaps was the human right to water, because it said so little about how water is to actually be delivered and how the right is to be guaranteed, that when the Sustainable Development Goals target 6.1 in particular, the universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water, when that comes along, there's a rush to achieve it by any means necessary. And in Cambodia, as I will show, the government is trying to do that by hooking itself up to a bottom of the pyramid business model. So nowadays, in the aftermath of the SDG 6.1, bottled water has actually been upgraded. It was initially treated with pessimism as a temporary measure at best, but now it's actually viewed as a primary source of drinking water for poor households, as long as they can do their cooking, cleaning, laundry and personal hygiene with another source of water that they don't drink. Bottled water in itself is very heavily critiqued from activists and progressive perspectives. Political ecology literature has a lot to say about the uneven choices of the poor. And the World Bank hold on to a narrative that bottled water is indeed a consumer choice and a way to meet needs. Well, when they do that, according to Coy and Walter, the uneven choices of the poor are sidelined, especially when affluent communities have privileged access to deep water aquifers. They have better waste management, so their water sources are less polluted. They have better pipe supply. Pacheco-Vega, Raul Pacheco-Vega is someone I've engaged with very heavily in this particular project, and he's very critical of bottled water because it undermines the water commons, it undermines the way in which citizens can participate, it undermines the regulatory roles of governments, and it's symptomatic of basically a dereliction of duty, especially when bottled water companies are allowed to commodify the product further, especially when there's times of crisis, when regulations get weakened. It's a slippery slope once you open the door to commodification and privatization in Vega's point of view. And also these companies will get away with very bad marketing campaigns. I mean, here you can see Bonafont, which is part of the Danone group. well, this is apparently water for kids. This is water especially for your children. And as Pacheco-Vega points out, unless they have actually come up with a new combination of hydrogen and oxygen, they shouldn't be able to market water specifically for children. So Pacheco-Vega asks, how is an industry that makes money from packaging a scarce resource compatible with the conditions for the global norm for the human right to water? I personally am trying to really avoid polarizing narratives, such as the idea that packaging and selling water is always antithetical to the human right. We can say, for example, following Calon, that markets can reconfigure actors and resources in ways that create political value and social value as well as economic value, and following that, then we can ask, what roles do pro-social business models have in avoiding the worst inclinations of commodification? Can they actually work with policymakers? A lot of literature on social enterprise and social business nowadays talks about partnerships with policymakers rather than trying to undermine their jurisdictions. Following Gibson-Graham, Cameron and Healy's work on commoning and commoning protocols, I would ask if a pro-social business model can indeed facilitate common access to appropriate resources. And also, this particular model I'm looking at is a service, and services can be quite interesting because they do implicate people into systems of action and exchange, and there's a closer proximity between the provider and the service user, and sometimes there are obligations on both sides of the equation. So that's another thing to consider, is whether a service can be different to a fast-moving good. And I would argue these questions are good to ask in Cambodia, because Cambodia has a booming not-for-profit sector, and that's been the subject of a lot of my research in recent years. When we look at Cambodia, we can see some paradoxes and juxtapositions, really. Cambodia has the largest inland freshwater resources of any country in Southeast Asia. It has the Tonle Sap Lake, yet the difference between urban households and rural households in terms of water access is very stark. You can see that here. This is data from the World Health Organization and UNICEF's joint monitoring program, showing how pipe supplies, for example, reach now more than 70% of the urban population, but less than 10% of the rural population. And we can say that we're looking here at nearly 30% or just over 30% of the rural population also rely on unimproved water sources, or even worse, surface water, drinking directly from rivers, lakes and ponds, which is running the risk, of course, of waterborne diseases. We can say, for example, that diarrheal disease is still the leading cause of under 5 mortality in Cambodia. Diarrheal disease is caused by drinking unsafe water. One of the government's main partners, so if we're going back to this, we can say also that the government's budget for rural water infrastructure countrywide is less than $1 million a year. So we can see that the government are not taking their commitment to delivering rural water infrastructure seriously at all, despite these quite horrifying statistics. But nonetheless, the government are aiming to achieve that Sustainable Development Goal target 6.1 5 years early by 2025, and they aim to do it by wedding themselves to the private sector and bottom of the pyramid business, and also not-for-profit enterprises too. And one of their partners is Teuk Saat, the Cambodian business, Teuk Saat meaning clean water, that were founded as the first project of a French NGO called 1001 Fountains. Both organisations see themselves as a social business. They're very much modelled on and idolising Muhammad Yunus's social business models that have been pioneered in Bangladesh. And they distribute bottled treated water from kiosks directly to villagers' houses. The model has been very successful. The kiosks are constructed with funding from a number of different development agencies, and nowadays the NGO has 218 kiosks in 18 provinces, delivering water to more than 500,000 consumers a year. The OWI water brand is developed a branded water, so each of these water kiosks is what the CEO refers to as a micro social enterprise. Each kiosk is franchised. They take on a local water entrepreneur who lives within the commune that the kiosk is situated in, and the water entrepreneur will employ 2 assistants. The kiosk is built with development funding from UNICEF, USAID. The average cost is about $33,000 for a kiosk. And OWI Water, the brand, is the cheapest bottled water in Cambodia. It's a 20-litre bottle costing about 30% of the cost of the lowest priced competitor. The water treatment technology that is used in the kiosk is very advanced. The kiosks firstly, they use pumps or boreholes to draw in local surface water or groundwater if it's suitable. This is the inside of the kiosk where you can see the technology used. Behind the wall that you can see here, you can see preliminary treatment processes involving pre-filtration, percolation, sand filtration, activated carbon. And then after that, the water moves on to 4 filters to get the pollution particles down to 1 part per million before the remaining bacteria is killed with ultraviolet rays. And the water that comes out of the kiosk conforms to the World Health Organization standards. It's also tested every month at one of Teuk Saat's 3 regional water testing laboratories. So I visited 2 kiosks in eastern Cambodia. One is classified as a tier 1 kiosk, meaning it easily exceeds its sales targets. And it was commissioned because of arsenic contamination in the groundwater. The second kiosk is classified as tier 3, which means it was failing to meet its targets on a monthly basis. It seemed that the relative success of tier 1 and tier 3 might be to do with the mindset of the entrepreneur. It was quite clear that the tier 1 entrepreneur had a stronger entrepreneurial disposition. He had a strong capacity to turn problems into solutions. For example, piped supply arrived in the community, and he did lose a lot of customers when it arrived, but he remains optimistic that the business is still viable because most people have to boil their piped supply water, and that's an inconvenience. And in the end, he actually hooked the pipe supply up to his own kiosk. So he's no longer drawing water in from the Mekong River. It costs more because he's paying for the water, but he doesn't have to spend time pumping it from the river, especially in the raining season when the pathways are waterlogged. And he can spend more time on his delivery rounds, and he's now delivering to local businesses as well as the villagers. The tier 3 entrepreneur, in contrast, seemed to be blaming a lot of factors outside of his control for the failure of the business. He said that the villagers don't like his water because it smells bad, that there are competing companies further away that have access to better water sources, and he doesn't think that the villagers will change to his water even if it is cheaper, and no matter how hard he promotes it. So I can say that the entrepreneurial dispositions are different, but what was not so different is the ethical dispositions of both. Both of them firmly saw themselves as providing a service and also touched on merit making in different ways. They enacted their ethical dispositions quite differently. The first entrepreneur, for example, spoke about merit making and providing a professional service, a professional high quality water service, but he would never give water away free. The failing entrepreneur gave away free water quite routinely by the look of it. He said he would give it to people on credit without expectation that it would ever be paid for. Another duty that they both take very seriously is that they have to deliver free water to the local schools. It is subsidized by the NGO, but it's still something that they have to take considerable time out of their day for, but they do it with complete commitment. Another aspect of the ethical deliberation, which was quite interesting, I found, is that Teuk Saat allow the kiosk to set their own salaries. The CEO told me that even the most profitable kiosks often report lower profits than the less profitable ones because they set their salaries high and therefore their reported surplus is lower. But the CEO didn't have a problem with this, even though some of the surplus is supposed to go to the Community Development Fund. The way he saw it was that they should set their own salaries and be responsible for that. And following Gibson-Graham from 2006, then we can say that the moment that the appropriation of surplus is actually a relational moment, that how can we say surplus labor is never predefined, instead it is established relationally at the moment of surplus appropriation itself. So by allowing the autonomous deliberation among kiosk workers on what their necessary wages are, what counts as surplus afterwards, they Teuk Saat are encouraging ethical reflection. Once the basic needs are met, then the entrepreneurs remain morally committed to providing the water because they know it's an important community service. The service users had very different outlooks between Tier 1 and Tier 3 as well. In Tier 1, the service users are very committed to the kiosk. They have a strong affinity, a strong sense of ownership towards it. And they also readily conceived that the entrepreneur, the water entrepreneur, is making merit. One woman who I interviewed said, "I think about that a lot, is making merit with water." They were also committed to it being the best solution. Even though they had a pipe supply arriving, they said that the pipe supply isn't clean. They were heavily invested in the kiosk because they had a strong role in setting it up, which I'll come to shortly. The interesting thing that correlates with the entrepreneur is that the entrepreneur said he'd never give free water away. The service users said also that they should not be giving away free water. And they go even further than that. They were saying that every person in the village effectively had a duty to buy the water. This came out in a focus group with female service users. They were saying it was their duty to use the kiosk and their duty to pay for the water, which I find a bit problematic. I mean, there seemed to be a kind of very Foucauldian sense of governmentality there, where they're buying the water in order to be considered good citizens and in order to regulate their bodily health, and also to legitimize really the government strategy of bottom of the pyramid business and water kiosks and bottled water as a way of meeting their responsibilities. In the tier 3 kiosk, the service users had very little affinity, really. Half of them saw no difference at all between OE and other bottled providers they used previously. And it was quite widely viewed actually to be a poor solution to their problems. One farmer that I spent time with said that I asked him, do you think that merit making applies? And he laughed and said, maybe he'll get more merit if he makes the pipes reach our houses. Essentially, they wanted pipe supply, and this was a second best for them. I would say that we can say that the dispositions of the entrepreneurs mattered in the success of the kiosks, but also the origins of the kiosk go some way to explaining why the community supports it. One reason the community supports it could be that the entrepreneur is a good entrepreneur, he engages them well as customers and gains their loyalty, but much deeper than that, they were involved in the outset in mobilizing for this, and they have connections to a very strong commune chief with the Right Party, that is the ruling political party, the Cambodia People's Party, and they had very strong connections to the local authorities. So I said they had a pipe supply. What happened there was that a road was in the middle of being constructed during the 2017 local commune elections. It's hanging there as a promise for them if they vote the right way, and they did, and they got the road, and very shortly afterwards a company arrived because it was now viable to set up a pipe supply network, and they got a pipe supply shortly afterwards. So this is a quite good outlook for the tier 1 commune in terms of its connections and its mobilizing, and it was very much unlike the tier 3 situation, which did not start from mobilizing in the community, but rather one commune chief acting alone without any support from the community, really. He represented the opposing political party at that time called the Cambodian National Rescue Party. He actually took out a loan in his own name from the pagoda. So he took out this loan in his own name to carry out works, including drilling for boreholes and testing the groundwater before the kiosk could be commissioned. This commune chief, he was driven out of the commune hall in 2017. Basically, after the commune elections, the opposing party got 40% of the vote. And in anticipation of a potential loss at the 2018 election, the leader of the opposition was jailed for treason, and the opposing party, the Rescue Party, were banned outright. The commune chiefs that they had garnered from the commune elections were given an ultimatum. They could either defect to the ruling party, or they could be run out of the commune altogether. And that's what happened when this commune chief declined to change his allegiances. And it was quite painful, really. I had to meet him 15 kilometers outside of the commune. When I did speak to him, he was being routinely followed. And he ended up calling my research assistant, asking him if we could call Teuk Saat and ask Teuk Saat to pay this loan that he'd taken out from the pagoda, because he couldn't afford to pay it. He thought the profits from the kiosk would repay the loan, but that didn't happen. So
Isaac, just letting you know you're nearly at 25 minutes now.
Okay, so I'll try not to go too much longer. So we could see a real sticky situation here, and the kiosk operator, moreover, was a very close friend of the commune chief, and he was being harassed by the commune hall. He felt that the commune hall were trying to drive him out. They asked him to put up ruling party literature in the kiosk. He refused. And he also felt, which was where things got very uncomfortable, he felt that Teuk Saat were actually complicit in this, that really they just wanted an easy life and they wanted good relations with the commune hall, and they would rather he left. And When I visited the kiosk as a participant observer, as well as to do interviews, a delegate from the commune hall, from the newly appointed people occupying the commune hall, was there going through the accounts. I interviewed him, and he continually referred to this water kiosk entrepreneur as weak and unable. And the business advisor working for Teuk Saat also turned up at that time. So I observed what happened there. Not once did the Teuk Saat business advisor talk to the water entrepreneur that he's supposed to be working with. He spent his whole time talking to the delegate from the commune chief and the commune hall that's part of this so-called kiosk committee. And he was even going through all of the kiosk accounts with the person from the commune hall, despite that being the responsibility of the entrepreneur. So it did seem to me to be a very sticky situation for Teuk Saat, where they were kind of looking for an easy life. And the quotes here from the Tier 3 kiosk entrepreneur kind of show his anguish, really, but also that he was really struggling against the odds while being effectively kicked around. He was struggling to try and make this kiosk work. The issues with the packaged water itself became quite interesting when I interviewed the CEO of Teuk Saat and also a representative of the UNICEF Watson project. Basically, UNICEF are the biggest backer. They have funded 105 of these water kiosks. The CEO, unsurprisingly, thinks that the kiosks are a permanent solution. They're here to stay. I asked him about pipe supply. He says you can't compare the two, that the pipe supply is not clean. UNICEF representative, despite them having invested so heavily, in fact, kiosks are their biggest investment, really surprised me when he said that it's definitely not a temporary solution. His framing is that basically it's a transitory measure. They want to achieve higher middle income status, and eventually they should have pipe supply everywhere, just like other countries will do, and just like cities should do. And he speculated on new innovations. For example, you could have a pipe supply with a water filtration device fitted in the house rather than fitted in a kiosk, and that could cut costs for water consumption drastically. So they have very different views, and I contrast that with Pacheco-Vega, coming back to him, who is quite adamant that packaged water is only ethical as a very short-term measure in very specific circumstances like natural disasters reaching people with packaged water. Pacheco-Vega is saying that this is all a slippery slope. Once you commodify water by packaging it, you get more marketizing, more privatizing, and more erosion of the regulatory function. I side here with the UNICEF representative and not with Pacheco-Vega on this issue. That this is the important argument. Let's see, where am I? Yeah, I side with the UNICEF representative. For a start, we can say that the efficiency of tap water comparative to bottled water in a rich country where safe drinking water comes from the tap is not the same as a low-income country like Cambodia, where villagers boil water before drinking it, incurring costs of wood fuel and also health risks from smoke inhalation. Moreover, at this point in time, Cambodia is nowhere near to having pipe supply extended countrywide. So, and the further issue is that so little of what they actually need for the household, if you consider washing, laundry and sanitation, so little of that is drinking water that actually we could ask if all their water does need to be potable and a municipal supply at this stage. So I think as a temporary measure, it has some validity in the medium term. We can say that the model is fraught with tension, both politically and ethically. But to come back to putting a positive spin on it, if we say, let's look at the positive successful kiosk at least, we can say that the kiosk is doing some interesting things. It brings surface water into public use, which would otherwise be drinkable. So it's the opposite, therefore, of private large bottled water companies draining water aquifers and excluding people from resources. It's providing a service that wouldn't have otherwise existed. It has enhanced resilience within that community. People co-manage the facilities, they feel part of it, and there is strong ethical deliberation in the process of running it. Also, I would say that there is observation of some commoning protocols. We can look beyond water as the common resource, following Gibson-Graham, Cameron and Healy again. I would say that if we shift focus from water to the kiosk and the resource flows involved in the kiosk model, then it is one way of examining commoning protocols. The international development agencies that fund the kiosks mean that the cost of the kiosk construction doesn't have to be passed on to the service user. So they get a subsidized low-cost water supply through redistributions of money from the rich world to the low-income world through aid flows. They are getting cheap water flowing through the kiosk, which on its way through the kiosk generates some income, some secure income for certain members of the community. And there are indeed practices of distributing benefits widely and giving communities an active role in managing. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much for your time, and happy to have a discussion about what you think of this model and what its implications are for development.
Thank you so much, Isaac. That was really interesting and a wonderful insight into this very complex issue of water and access to water. So perhaps if people have a question that they want to ask or a comment they'd like to make, you can either put it in the chat or you can let me know that you want to ask a question and I can call on you to switch on your mic and your camera. It might be nicer to do it that way since there's not so many of us here that we can't manage to talk to each other and give Isaac a bit of a sense of who it is that's providing feedback. So while you're all thinking of your questions and your comments, I've got something I'd like to ask Isaac. I don't actually have a particularly well-formed question, but I think it's fascinating the political overlays in all these processes. And I'm sorry if it's a bit early, I wasn't quite following, but Teuk Saat is the company, it's a private company, is that correct? And they are, it's an NGO, so they're supporting the building of these kiosks and directing aid money, but they're also obviously quite embedded in political allegiances. Is that what you see happening?
They work very closely with the government, so they do have to be, how do you say, very non-political, which in itself for the NGO community I think is controversial. You know, going from shouting to counting and abandoning advocacy altogether in order to maintain cordial relationships with government counterparts. So I would say that perhaps they are a bit too close to the government. But what I really saw there, I mean, I think essentially, I think they are still quite independent. But what I saw is where the rubber hits the road, like in practice, in a community where authoritarian politics is really, rubbing up against people. This was a community that had voted for the opposition party for the last 15 years. And now they have a ruling party, people running the commune hall. And I just think that the field workers didn't know what to do in that situation. And the only thing that they felt they could do was probably drive this poor entrepreneur out, this failing entrepreneur out, and put someone in place that the commune were happy with. And I don't think that that comes from high up in the organisation. I think it just comes, you know, from the practice of development and the everyday realities in a situation where you have authoritarian regime like the Hun Sen regime. It's
such a stark commentary on, you know, the whole entrepreneurship drive within aid and development, and this also the assumption that when something enters somehow into commodity markets, the politics falls away and it becomes sort of, you know, neutral and managed by the market itself. It's the story just so strongly demonstrates.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that managerialist narrative that comes with social entrepreneurship time and time again just doesn't stack up in a situation like this. You can't take the politics out. It can't be post-political.
Are there any some questions or comments from others in the audience? I don't want to take over the conversation. I'll just interrogate Isaac because I'm starting a new project in Cambodia. Kath, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, well, I could just muse, I suppose, and I'm hoping other people will put their cameras on so we can say hi and they could be part of the conversation. Yeah, thanks, Isaac. It's great to kind of hear this paper again and just think about it in wider terms, because it really comes to that issue of to what extent is water a commons and how do we manage it as a commons. And what you're doing is kind of showing how the commoning opportunity is different at different stages of the water supply chain, if you even want to call it. Like, you know, there's the actual generation of collected water, and then there's the distribution of it, and then there's the consumption of it, and so on. And I just wondered, you know, like one of the issues here is that the care of the water as a commons isn't happening, in the sense that the water that gets delivered to people isn't drinkable. So how do we even think about how we care for the water before it gets to that point where it then needs to be, you know, chemically treated, and that then becomes a commodified item and makes it into a commodity, you know? And to what extent can people be involved in the actual production of water? Like, for instance, the collection of water locally, so that they could be more in charge with caring for that commons that they then would be able to access, even if it does need some kind of treatment. And I know from other parts of Asia, there's a real reluctance to collect water in tanks, for instance, whereas in dry societies like Australia, that's kind of one of the ways that decentralized communities access water, as they collect their own in tanks and dams and so on. But there's a very different cultural kind of relationship to collecting your own rainwater, for instance, and using it. But I just wondered how this kind of process interacts with that, because you're saying some people would rather have the piped water but then treat it. Others are just going to go with this very commodified version. But anyway, that's just a kind of, it makes me think about how do community economies think about commoning at different points, and, you know, what opportunities are there for different kinds of interventions. I like the way you're kind of not coming down strongly on one or the other side. You're really looking at all the nuances here. Yeah, but anyway, just an incoherent set of responses, but I'm just wondering if you've got any comments.
Well, one comment I'll make, Catherine, is you know, something I put in the draft yesterday and thought, no, don't have time for that, but there was a whole section on rainwater, which I have written up for a jointly written paper on rainwater harvesting in Bangladesh. So I've contributed the vignette from this, which is that Teuk Saat are really down on rainwater harvesting. I tell you, it's on their website that the rainwater harvesting is unsafe, that mosquito larvae being bred in the jars and things like that. So it's seen as a health hazard, which it actually is, because of the way that rainwater harvesting tends to be managed. But it's not like it can't be done safely. But the CEO's response is, it so rarely is. It's a health hazard, and the responses of the villagers in the Tier 1 commune that do collect rainwater are quite interesting. They spoke of arguments with neighbours where a neighbour had actually dumped a bag of feces in her water, and they really had worries and concerns about the safety of storing rainwater generally, and there was some quite nasty tales. But I got the sense that it had been amplified locally. I spoke to the regional business manager about the rainwater harvesting, and he said they can't drink rainwater because of the acid rain. And I said, how do you know that? And he said, well, if you test a battery and when it's been rained on, it still works, and that's how we know it's got acid rain. And it's a bit strange to me, but then in the villages I asked them and they said exactly the same thing. My research assistant told me he just thinks it's a common, there's nothing really in that, it was just a common story. But I got the impression that it may have been, kind of amplified by the regional business manager as a very bad marketing ploy, basically, too. So rainwater harvesting is an interesting one, because half of the people in the poorest villages do harvest rainwater. It's just how much they can get, how big their capacity is, how long it will go for into the dry season, and how safe their storage is.
Yeah, I just wondered whether that issue of trust was also coming into it, that somehow people are less willing to trust others as a collective that's caring for the water, but they're willing to trust the commodification process more. Like if they buy it, they'll trust it. But if they
trust it because they've seen the technology, they time and time again, they said, we've been to the kiosk, we've seen the machine. It's like the machine. And, it's really quite strange, but they really do worship that technology. They feel completely secure with it. They feel safe giving it to their children. That was a fundamental, I think, first and foremost that came out was safety for their children.
Thanks.
Does anyone else have a question?
Yes, I do. Hello, everybody. I'm sorry I arrived late, so I might be asking a question that you've already answered, Isaac. I'm from New Zealand, and we have an issue here with our water. Of course, a lot of it has been contaminated, as Catherine pointed out. It's become undrinkable and unswimmable and everything. But we also have beautiful, clear springs and some of the purest water in the world, the ancient water that comes up from aquifers. And when there is what is happening at the moment is that the government has been selling off the water for $1 a tanker. So you think about that for a minute. When Māori, Indigenous people, raise this question about the water, the government then maintains that nobody owns it. So I don't know if that sort of relates somehow to Peter Lynevale's statement that you had up when I first came on. And of course, because I am really interested in the commons and see it as a solution to a lot of situations, if I raise that with regards to water with Māori, then they see that as a colonising impetus. So I'm just wondering if you've come up with this situation before that I haven't probably described very well. Just news this morning is that in our South Island, the main tribe down there is about to take the Crown to court over water, wanting to share not ownership, but the right to care for it. So it's a kind of a watch this space sort of situation, but nobody's mentioning the commons. So my question is, where you have a society that's got Indigenous people and colonisation and all of that going on, where does the commons sit within that?
It's an interesting point to make. I mean, when you're saying the government's saying nobody owns it, they're talking of an unmanaged commons, aren't they? That's exactly what they're talking about. They're talking about the tragedy of the commons and the unmanaged commons right there, which isn't a commons at all. So that's quite interesting to hear that come from policymakers. My experience is in in Cambodia, with water in this respect are quite specific. The management of common resources in Cambodia do have frameworks like community-based natural resource management and so on. So they do have rights officially, but I guess it's no, it's not a commons at all, according to the commoning protocols that Catherine and Stephen talk about, if the people who are using the resource aren't actually involved in its governance. And it sounds to me like that's a situation where they are not involved in caring for the resource, or they're being prevented from doing so in certain ways.
Yes.
I mean, what I'm seeing with these kiosks is a weird thing, because they are not involved in caring for the resource. I would say that caring part is being delegated. It's being delegated to Teuk Saat, and by extension to a French NGO that's shipping all this equipment, which is something I was discussing in a previous iteration of a paper, but didn't have time to go through today, that all of that technology they use in the kiosks, the filtration systems, can be sourced in Cambodia, but they choose to import it from the French NGO Teuk Saat, and actually it is made by a subsidiary company of Teuk Saat, of the French NGO 1001 Fontaines, who get money from Danone, Google, and 30 other foundations, you name it. And they're also supported by Grameen Credit Agricole, which is Mohammed Yunus's thing. So they actually put the capital up to develop this, these filtration systems, these UV filtration systems, and now they are actually the supplier, if you like. So that's all vertically integrated into their business model in quite a nefarious way. And that's something, I mean, this could have been a whole day long presentation if I was going everywhere with it. But we talked about this before, Catherine. There is something quite icky in the background with all this, with this model when you really dig into it. That it's a classic bottom of the pyramid business. What they're doing is like, say, HP, Hewlett-Packard, where they realised that they couldn't sell a lot of photocopying and printing machines in Africa. So what they do is they ship in all the photocopying machines and lease them out to entrepreneurs who can then make business printing birthday cards and doing printing and things like that. And Hewlett-Packard sell a ton load of printing cartridges. So they found a way to make that BOP model work by kind of breaking it down into its different parts in the value chain. And that's what 1001 Fountains are doing essentially with this technology, is you know, breaking it down and leasing it to the entrepreneurs, who have to pay 15% of their revenue gross, not net, to Teuk Saat. And that's what keeps Teuk Saat and Geo ticking over, is their royalties essentially from the water sales.
I think it's really interesting to think about how, you know, you describe the way that commoning processes are kind of enfolded in this whole set of commercial and political processes as well. And I think, Myri, your question's really really interesting, because I wonder, it just made me think about the legislation around the Whanganui River, and how, you know, I wonder if that's something that you can think about as a kind of commoning that's enfolded in a set of legal processes, which aren't, of course, naming anything as commons, but in a way are imposing a distribution of management and responsibility in a way that, I mean, I think it could be seen as being in tune with commons management approaches.
That's how I see it, but I keep quiet about it. Yeah, even though there's a role for being someone who stirs up waves, but I'm being very careful. I'm trying to find allies in New Zealand, and I'm being very careful.
Yeah.
Using the commons more as an inspiration rather than a kind of a public paradigm at the moment.
Yeah, labels always take you places, not necessarily where it is you thought you wanted to go.
That's right.
Yeah. Great. Anyone else want to pipe up? I'm looking at the names that are on the bottom half of my screen who do not have cameras or microphones on, and wondering if anyone in that group would like to share a question. Nate, was that you? No. Stephen, sorry.
Oh, no, that's quite all right. Isaac, great presentation. And it's good to hear this paper. I think perhaps the third time round. And Mari, that was a really interesting comment. It reminds me of the water extraction politics in Maine, where essentially the law is that whoever has the biggest borehole gets the most water. And it feels like that kind of pricing structure would really suit industrial users of water, pricing in a bucket tanker. It's almost as if we would need to come up with a concept of aqua nullius to parallel terra nullius. Someone's probably already used that term, but I too, like Kath, was really struck, Isaac, by the role of sort of thinking about commons at different stages in a process here of whatever, delivering water to people on an equitable basis, whether we enshrine it as a legal right or not. But there's not just spatial variability, there's also temporal variability that you underscored in your presentation, that given the reality that pipe water is not there for Cambodia, that this kiosk system is a way of actually assuring the common benefit of access to safe drinking water. And that seemed to be something that people were invested in. And it doesn't preclude a trajectory that would eventually, maybe have piped water combined with decentralized treatment. And that could be an outcome at a later date.
It's a provocation, in a sense. Its existence is a provocation to think further. It's saying, okay,
so like if we center on that idea of care and custodial responsibility, whether we call it a commons or not, then we can begin to think strategically about in and through time about what would actually allow that water to get delivered. And to that end, I remember reacting to this the last time. You said that you were when the tier 1 provider villagers said it's our duty to buy the water. You both times you've talked about this paper that I can remember, that made you uncomfortable. But I guess I just was wondering if you might see that as a moment where perhaps the villagers themselves were saying, actually this commodity is priced cheaply, it's a service. Part of our exercise of responsibility is to support this initiative. Like, couldn't that be seen as a commons practice?
Well, if we're caring for the commons, then part of our caring is to actually sustain it. So. Yeah,
and that a commercial relationship could actually work to preserve common benefit in that sense.
Before you respond, Isaac, I think Kerry wanted to ask a question.
I can wait.
Well, we're nearly out of time.
It was more just of a comment. I was just thinking particularly when all the kind of stakeholders were saying piped water is the future to become a middle income kind of country, what my mind started thinking about was what was happening in Mexico City last summer with having to truck water to the kind of poor areas of the city. I'm not sure if that had to do with anything to do with centralisation of water, but also I was reading an article of people here in Australia, in New South Wales, in rural areas, said they turned on the tap and nothing came out. I'm not sure if they were connected to pipe water or a tank, but I guess in an increasingly climatically disrupted world, it's interesting that there's kind of an almost blind faith in centralised strategies to improve people's lifestyles. So it was really, I would have asked questions about tank water, but obviously Kath Gibson already asked that. But it also seemed interesting in that response that then there was no faith, there was no trust in the NGO kind of CEO who just thought, well, people can't be responsible enough to not poison themselves with their own water collection. And, probably some people get sick, but I don't know. It seems, anyway, just some kind of comments on strategies there.
Well, maybe that's kind of what I observed in the tier 3 kiosk, frankly, where they were sceptical of it and they see it as a second best solution. That, you know, was some of them, for example, they collected rainwater or got groundwater from a well, and they would put it through a sand filtration box that had been provided by another NGO, and just treat it that way, and then put it in the Teuk Saat bottle because they liked the bottle. It had a tap on it. So they would buy the bottle once, keep the bottle, never buy a refill, but just keep the bottle. And I spoke to one woman who'd been using the same bottle for 2 years for the water for her family that she just runs through a sand filter. So it's kind of a sense of the kind of things that Arturo Escobar would have written about, where people, you know, just kind of circumvent development projects to their own ends. So yeah, I think in a different context, you may see different strategies, even in villages that are like, you know, 20 or 30 kilometers apart. It just depends on the path dependency and the local situation. But I do understand Mexico is also very interesting for bottled water. It's one of the countries with the highest rates of bottled water consumption now. Pacheco-Vega is in the reference list. If you want to read his work, he's from Mexico and writes extensively about water activism in Mexico.
So Isaac, we've got 1 minute left. Did you want to have a last word just to round off?
Well, I'll just say thank you all. The thing I didn't get onto was the problem of the plastic bottle, where I found entrepreneurs gluing plastic bottles back together. They can't recycle them. They've got nowhere to go. They're turning them into buckets and plant pots, and they're just mounting up in the villages. And then I found a situation where the successful kiosk, the service users are saying, we've got to move to small bottles now. We want small bottles. So really what we've seen is the bottle weaning them onto the smaller one. And so there's a whole material culture thing to look at in this project. I think, what impact does that bottle device have on the communities, which is become quite interesting. That will be another paper in progress that I can maybe come back to with a presentation another time.
Well, thanks so much. That was fascinating.
Yeah, thanks, Isaac. Terrific.
That was great.
And great to see everybody.
Yes, thank you all for coming.
You,
For those that are up and awake, the next conference session is actually at 10:30 this morning, Australia time. With Caroline Hussein running a panel on Black social economy, I think is the title.
Oh, is that today? I thought it was tomorrow.
No, you've got to read your emails. I'm sending emails.
Oh, okay. Whoa.
Yeah, this morning.